Lecture for Section 3, Meeting the Challenges of the New Age. The term that I want you to be aware of before this lecture will be deism, the philosophical belief that suggests God created the universe but does not intervene in its operation or human affairs. It also rejects the supernatural aspect of religion, and it is a concept shared among Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and other American forefathers. Industrial Revolution and the market revolution both contributed to an influx of immigration into the United States, particularly in the northern states. Although the market revolution affected all aspects of American life, it was most felt within the nation's cities, as the market revolution drastically increased the size of the cities and their populations. The instant cities we will see spring up around critical points along the transportation network. Cities like Chicago, San Francisco, and St. Louis grew from towns of 5,000 into cities of 100,000. By 1860, 20% of Americans will live in cities. This is up from the 3% that we discussed in previous lectures. The largest cities formed in the northeastern and northwestern regions, while the South's resistance to change limited the encouragement of immigration. Imagine when you have your entire labor force, your entire workforce is made up of enslaved individuals, enslaved people. What is the point of immigrating to the South? There are no jobs there. There's nothing that is going to form to allow people to immigrate to that area. So, for the most part, we see that the immigration is going to focus predominantly on the northern states, which of course means that the northern states are going to deal with issues like diversity, uh, economic growth, and how are you going to incorporate various different cultures and groups into that growth, and also deal with how are you going to house these individuals. So we will see, for the most part, far more conflict in the north than we see in the south. But this, of course, comes along with a massive economic boom that is bringing these people in from Europe. As in Europe, remained a constant in American society, especially in the southern states. By 1845, 4% of New York citizens owned two-thirds of the state's wealth. Despite the infamous rag to riches myth, only 5% of the nation's wealthy originated from the lower classes. However, most Americans and European immigrants were sold on the possibility of being part of that small percentage. Many antebellum or pre Civil War Americans were poor, so poor, near to the point of absolute failure. The vast majority of the poor were related to the growing immigration population, where severe weather and disease had a significant impact on the survival of all low income Americans. This is an image that basically is around the period that we're talking about. You can see the main form of transportation, of course, is horse drawn, which means that the city streets are filled in horse excrement, whether it be urine or poop. You can see how the city at this point looks to be very crowded, very condensed at this point, with very little freedom of movement. Now imagine within this city where you're seeing more and more of these buildings starting to be erected. They're low quality. Most of them are extreme fire hazards that are supporting large number of families in very poor conditions. And the reason why this is possible is because of the influx of individuals coming into the cities from overseas. They're desperate for a place to stay. So building these places on the cheap is, again, capitalistic concepts. Spend as little money as necessary so that you can make as much money as possible. And unfortunately, this is only going to create far more tension and conflict throughout the cities. Industrial, market, and transportation revolution, a revised social order begins to emerge. As the percentage of members in the elite class increased only slightly, The middling sorts, or the middle class, became a large and well established part of American socioeconomic hierarchy. The middle class benefited most from the growing industrial economy as earnings per capita rose 1.5% between 1840 and 1860. The middle class consisted of professionals, small merchants, small manufacturers, land owning farmers, self employed artisans, and factory managers. And this is going to create a new white collar career path that is tied into the industrial markets. Like those of the working class, members of the middle class also experience an unpredictable lifestyle, which resulted in increased mobility within the class system, whether that be up or down. The lifestyles of these families tended to emphasize lifestyles of sobriety, steadiness, and responsibility. With the changing economy and the social system that was affected by the Industrial Revolution, we're of course going to see a resurgence within religious beliefs. And some of these are going to shape a new attitude by challenging the former Puritan faiths. A second great awakening is going to move from the frontier into the new market towns. It's going to stress salvation through personal faith. New theological beliefs were far more democratic in nature. The concept of original sin was replaced by the optimistic belief in an individual's willingness to accept the Christian God's word with open doors of salvation. And it allowed a follower to have more control over their destiny, as they were no longer condemned or blessed by an unknown predetermined order. Evangelicals became the dominant religion of the new middle class. They rejected both the Enlightenment's focus on rationalism and the concept of deism. They focused on the importance of faith and personal relationship with one's God. Preachers like Charles G. Finney urged businessmen to convert and adopt the self discipline and individualism that religion offered, or at least their religion offered. Middle class women promoted Finney's ideals of self discipline and personal responsibility. These women tended to become far more involved in social matters despite their low social standing. The new theology led to special reform movements, including abolitionism, temperance, and women's rights. Second Great Awakening, the Industrial Revolution also changed the social and political norms and mores of the previous centuries. Long established social tradition and hierarchies experienced numerous challenges from a new generation of Americans. These challenges were the result of young adults raised under the industrial economy who had been long separated from their colonial past. The new generation challenged the authority of parents, political authorities, as well as economic and religious leaders. The aforementioned changes to the role of women in the economy triggered additional modifications to their social functions. Social roles of the wife and the husband remain constant. We will see that women begin to be seen more as partners rather than possessions. Married couples are going to become far more independent from their families. Advocated by Catherine Beecher, we will see the rise of a concept known as separate spheres or domestic public dichotomies, which instilled a form of separate but equal authority among men and women. You had the private sphere or the women's realm, which focused on moral influence of the family as women were seen as nurturing, gentle, and moral. The public sphere, or man's realm, focused on making money and governing the home and community, as men were seen as steady, industrious, and responsible. Separate spheres came to represent a new social role for women within American society that would only build as time progressed. Middle class family, we see that middle class women managed their homes and provided a haven for their husbands. Attitudes about appropriate male and female roles and qualities hardened during this period. Middle class couples limited their family size through birth control, abstinence, and at times abortion. The American birth rate declined as middle class women, when appropriate or able, could work in the workforce. Physicians urged sexual impulses to be controlled, particularly among women, whom the community and religious leaders presumed possessed superior morality. Americans responded to the dislocations of the market revolution by promoting various social reform campaigns. Reformers recognized that traditional small scale methods of social reform no longer worked. Regional and national organizations emerged from local projects to deal with various social problems. Reformers mixed political and social activities because they tended to seek the power of the state in order to promote their ends. And we're going to find until recently, historians have, for the most part, just started to acknowledge the central role that women played in various reform movements of this era. These women would be a significant force of advocacy despite not having the same rights and privileges as men. It involved temperance. Now, this movement emerged in the 19th century and it was fueled by concerns about the social problems associated with heavy alcohol consumption, such as poverty, crime, and family breakdown. Many temperance societies were formed, including the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the WCTU. And this organization played a significant role in the movement, particularly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It consisted of middle class reformers, especially women, who advocated for moderation and abstinence from alcohol, often through pledges and educational programs. And we will see that it gained increased support during the Panic of 1837. Many working class Americans will join the temperance movement, and by the mid 1840s, alcohol consumption had been cut in half. We're going to see, as they perceived, as the basic steps of how a man could go from a reasonable, responsible life and turning into an absolute drunkard. You can, by looking at this, see the basic forms, but understand that this is a problem during this period. It's about as serious as the problem that we have with illegal drugs in our society. Keep in mind, this is during a period of the Industrial Revolution or the industrial phase where we are seeing families that are both husband and wife, and sometimes their children, working in factories anywhere from 12 to 16 hours, 6 days a week, earning very little money. In order for them to survive in these cities, both the husband and the wife and the children have to work. And sometimes that is just barely making their basic needs. So when a husband goes out and starts spending that money in order to, in a lot of cases, overcome the dreariness of the world around him, that money is starting to disappear from the family, which, of course, as you see at the bottom of this image, leaves the family alone and without a source of assistance. So, this is one of the reasons why we see during this period that alcoholism is really considered a major issue within the American society. Reformers also attacked prostitution by organizing charity for poor women and advocating for harsher criminal penalties. This had little success throughout the United States, especially in the major cities. Dorothea Dix's asylum movement fought for changes in the medical field and championed for the mentally ill, something that had rarely happened prior to her movement. She, along with others, encouraged prisons and jails to adopt a reform oriented approach rather than one focused on punishment in their management of inmates. Through lobbying Congress and state legislatures, the asylum movement established the first American mental asylums. The movement founded or expanded over 30 mental health hospitals throughout the United States. Though it had limited success, the movement challenged the belief that people with mental illnesses couldn't be helped. effects of the sphere of influence that we talked about before resulted in reforms to education. As educational reformers changed the traditional ways of educating children by not viewing children as sinners with wills to be broken, but rather innocent individuals needing gentle nourishing. The work of Horace Mann, often regarded as the father of American education, established a tax supported compulsory public school system. And again, understand that this is predominantly in the North. We won't really find this in the southern states. Most US states adopted a version of the system that Mann established in Massachusetts, and it included a program for normal schools in order to train professional teachers. And it is here where we see women were seen as more nurturing and were encouraged to become teachers, creating one of the first significant career opportunities for women outside factories. Decades of social advocacy culminated in the 1848 Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention. This would be seen as the beginning of the women's rights movement. At this convention, we will see that 300 reformers attend, and these women and their supporters' resolutions called for a wide range of rights for women, including the right to vote. They created the Declaration of Sentiments, which was a key document outlining the injustices faced by women and the demand for equal rights. The document was modeled after the Declaration of Independence. Unfortunately, in the end, many of the issues of the period were identified, but few of them were ever really solved. Of women in advocacy in the United States can be seen in Sarah and Angelina Grimke. These two sisters left their South Carolina home and traveled north to denounce slavery. They became the first female public speakers in American history. While men accorded women a secondary role in the anti slavery movement, we actually find that women were a majority of its members and the most active. They were the ones who took the ideas of the movement and then brought them into the public arena. In this period, we also have many of the free African Americans advocating for others in the South. More than half of the nation's free African Americans lived in the North, mainly in cities where they encountered both residential segregation, job discrimination, segregated public schools, and limits on their civil rights. So again, this is something we need to keep in mind. Yes, the North may have been far more liberal in their approach to African Americans and their civil rights, but they were not at a point where they could be considered free of blame in the area of discrimination. Free African Americans will form community support networks, newspapers, and churches. The economic prospects of African American men we will see deteriorate over a period of time, while free African Americans engaged in anti-slavery activities, but were frequent targets of urban violence themselves. In slavery took place prior to 1820, but failed to address the continuing reality of Southern slavery. The American Colonialization Society, or ACS, was one such program. It was formed in 1817 with the support from border state slave owners, one of them being Henry Clay, and it sought to repatriate former slaves to Africa. The society, though, displayed a serious lack of fundamental understanding of American slavery. Most importantly, they ignored the Americanization of former Africans. Keep in mind, these individuals, these enslaved individuals, even those who were free, had been in the United States for various amounts of generations. They did not know their language of their home world. They did not know the cultures of Africa, especially as many of these individuals came from the diverse cultures of Africa. They didn't know anything about their past. All they knew was the world that they grew up in within the United States. And of course, if you could imagine the horrors of living in America and then having to go through that again in Africa when you still, even there, are now considered an outsider. This made it even more difficult for free slaves to relocate to Africa. And in the end, only a small number of free African Americans were sent to Africa, where they founded the country of Liberia. Individuals like William Lloyd Garrison, who will denounce all compromise related to slavery, including political action and the constitutional modifications for slavery, and call for the immediate emancipation of all slaves on moral grounds. The 1833 Philadelphian American Anti Slavery Society was a prominent abolitionist organization during this period. It advocated for the immediate and unconditional end of slavery, and it utilized methods such as public lectures, publications, and civil disobedience to push its cause. The AASS or AASS grew rapidly, establishing numerous chapters and gaining a large membership, becoming a powerful force in the anti slavery movement. They're going to mail over 1 million pieces of propaganda that led to a crackdown in the southern states and a stifling of all dissent within those regions. And an unknown white man, Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, was born in February of 1818 on Maryland's eastern shore. A former slave of a brutal slave breaker named Edward Covey, he became the most important leader of the movement for African American civil rights in the 19th century. In 1845, Douglass published his autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, despite his apprehensions that the book might endanger his freedom. Later on, he would write 2 more books on the subject of slavery. He will travel both the United States and Europe advocating for an end to the institution of slavery. His activities will challenge the period's belief concerning the intelligence, or in the case of this period, the lack of intelligence of African Americans. Abolition steadily grew into a political issue once again as Congress was inundated with petitions calling for the end of slavery in the District of Columbia. Congress responded with the gag rule, which tabled all such petitions and banned their discussion. This will be repealed in 1844. John Quincy Adams' defense of the Armistead slaves furthered the arguments against slavery. Now, this period will mark the growing animosity between the American North and its southern states. This animosity is going to create a with us or against us mentality among the southern slave states in its view of the northern states. The tin can that was the issue of slavery was now too massive to kick down the road. The changes in the economy, social causes, and religious beliefs forced the topic of slavery to the forefront of the American consciousness. Whether the American leadership wanted to or not, they had to address this issue and make a choice, either continue or end slavery. The question then, of course, was what form would it take either way?